In today's video, we're going to be discussing some latest offseason trade rumors, including teams like Philly, Anaheim, and Detroit. We also have some updates on some recent standings. A big update as well regarding the Eastern Conference playoff race. Possible salary cap increase that could be more than $1 million. Some big injury updates and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we've already been NHL news and some trade rumors for the offseason to take a look at here, as well as some potential news on the salary cap. So let's dive right in and get started. First up, quick update on yesterday's news from the NHL waiver wire. We saw Avalanche defenseman Brad Hunt on waivers. As suspected, he did clear, so he can be reassigned to the American Hockey League. And no other news on the NHL waiver wire for today. Of course, we saw a few things happen in last night's action that were of significance. For one, we've seen Sabres goalie Devin Levi make his much anticipated debut with the Sabres. One of the greatest college goalie performances we've seen over the past couple of seasons. And it's certainly been very interesting to see how he would fare to NHL level. Picked up a win, played very well. I didn't get to watch the whole Sabres game, but I did get to see parts of it. And he looked like he was really in the groove, making some really big saves. So certainly for the young rookie, seemed to have adapted very well so far. It's only one game, a small sample size, but certainly the future looks incredibly bright for Levi between the pipes and Buffalo. That was quite a pickup. I know at the time of the trade, when the Sabres traded Sam Reinhart to the Florida Panthers, I know a lot of people weren't as familiar with Levi at that point in time, and they're maybe a little underwhelmed on the trade return, but I think now that's looking pretty good, especially considering Levi wasn't the only asset going to the Sabres. Of course, he later went on to have an appearance with Team Canada, get a little bit more attention, and then the college stats were just phenomenal. And now here we are, finally makes his debut. We also saw in Dallas, Jason Robertson continues to be one of the top young players in the game. Put up a 4-point night and broke the team record set by former captain Mike Modano for a single season record of 95 points. So certainly a great accomplishment there by Robertson. Seems like the sky's the limit. He's, like I said, one of the top young dynamic players here across the NHL. And then this afternoon, we saw a big game between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Boston Bruins. And at one point, it was looking like it might head to overtime, or that the Penguins might even pull off a victory, or at least get at least 1 point. But they ultimately fell to the Bruins in regulation, really making that Eastern Conference wildcard spot and the race forward not much more interesting going into tonight's actions. With a 4-3 regulation loss, that puts Florida, Buffalo, and Ottawa knocking up the doorstep, trying to knock the Penguins out of that spot. Now, if the Panthers pull off a victory tonight, they can bump Pittsburgh out of that spot and take it over, because they're only 1 point behind now. They would move ahead with 2 points. Because, of course, the Sabres and the Sens, who are probably a little bit less likely to grab the spot because they are a couple points behind Florida too. So there's a little bit more of a gap there, but still they could close that gap and make it even more interesting heading into the final 5, 6, 7 games for all of these teams. So that's a major loss for Pittsburgh that could put their playoff hopes in serious jeopardy. At one point they were behind 3-2, got it tied up 3-3. I believe they even had a later power play within the last 4 or 5 minutes, did not score, and then the Bruins scored with, I think it was around 2.5 or so to go. Pasternak completed his hat trick. I believe the puck hit a referee, though, and kind of had a favorable bounce there. But ultimately, the Pens lose, no matter what the reasonings are. Some big updates, a lot of some injuries, including Ottawa, which we've seen their game against the Flyers the other night. We saw a lot of carnage, including some significant injuries. We finally have a little bit more clarity on that. Since forward Derek Brassard is going to be out for a minimum of 2 months. Obviously, his season's over because of that, considering how little time is left. But the prognosis on him, was he broken, or I'm not sure whether it's broken or fractured. Either way, it's a type of break on his fibula. So obviously, that's a big bone in the leg. Obviously, the tibia is the bigger bone of the two, but still, it's a big recovery. I mean, it's about 8 weeks is what most recovery processes are. But depending on swelling, pain, everything like that, it can go a longer than that. It wouldn't be surprising if it's 3-4 months before it's completely feeling more normal for him. But it could be sooner than that. It's really hard to say. Either way, given where we are in proximity of the calendar, for it being the 1st of April, I would think that he's probably looking at April, May, June, July. If he really wants to play next year, I would think Ottawa likely would bring him back. Maybe, I'm not sure if it'd be on a contract or another PTO, but at the same time, he should be able to get himself going unless he runs into any more setbacks or issues with the surgery, which we won't know. But certainly I'd hope for his sake that it's not the end, because he's played quite well this year. But it's picked up 13 goals, coming in a league minimum contract on a PTO. Good pro, played 1,000 in his game, paid 1,000 for the Sens this year. He's been a real big help on and off the ice with the team, and I really think that they'd like to have him back if they can go on his own terms. But we'll see. It's a big injury. As far as the other injuries go, DJ Smith does say that between Chabot, Hamonic, and Chychrun, they're likely done for the season, but he said that there's a possibility that they may be able to get some of them back before the end. To me, that probably says that if they can win enough games and be right in that race in the last 1 or 2 games of the season are meaningful still, and they're not eliminated, that maybe they would come back, because like obviously you've seen players play through more things like in the playoffs, right? And it would be like a playoff type atmosphere trying to get in. That was my take on it. If they don't get to that point in the season, if they happen to lose a couple here coming up and it's pretty much over, then I would say that there's no point, right? So we'll see where that goes. Apparently, Ridley Gregg has been cleared and will appear in the game tonight against the Leafs, which starts in about, I'm recording about a half hour, 40 minutes before game time. So for Ridley Gregg, what happened, they said a sternum injury, and apparently they feared it was worse than what it was after having more imagery and stuff taken of it. Then they determined it wasn't as severe and he's okay to go. And they've also, because of all the defensive injuries, have recalled Jacob Bernard-Docker. So tonight we'll have the foursome here for the Nodak Sens, the University of North Dakota. Of course, the four players all played together in college. That's why the North Dakota program was, at least amongst the Sens community, referred to as a joke for a long time as the North Dakota Senators, because they had so many. So that includes the newly signed Tyler Clevin, who just came out of college and joined the team. Jacob Bernard-Docker comes up from the minors. And, of course, they also have rookie defenseman Jake Sanderson, as well as Shane Pinto, who's technically still in that rookie category as well, even though Sanderson and Pinto played a bit last year. Wouldn't have had the rookie status, except he ended up being out for a big chunk of the season. So didn't get enough games in them to lose that rookie status. But obviously, it's going to be big to see them, all four of them, in the game for the first time together tonight. Other injury updates from around the league. Lou Lamoriello held a media conference today, talked a bit about the fact that Matthew Barzal is still not back yet, of course, but he's starting to skate either today or tomorrow. So that's encouraging news. Hard to say how that goes to determine the return time, but right now they're looking pretty good to make the playoffs. So I would suspect that when they get to game one, that's still a few weeks away here, probably 2.5 weeks. I would hope by that point the odds will be good. I don't know if we'll see Barzal much, if any, in the rest of the regular season, but at least he's getting to the point where he can start skating, which is promising. He did confirm that Oliver Wahlstrom's season, however, is over. Some other injuries: William Eklund, the youngster in San Jose, his season's over. He had shoulder surgery for a torn labrum, which is a big recovery as well. So they wanted him to have that ahead of time to make sure he had a better chance of being ready for training camp. They expect him to be recovered sometime around September. And for the Habs tonight, I'm not sure the reasoning why, but I know their new sniper, who seems to score all the time, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, is not going to play in tonight's game, and he's going to be out, and Yoel Armia will draw back in. Onto the salary cap news. There is a possibility we could see the salary cap rise by more than $1 million, and without really the Players Association really having to give up a whole lot in concession. Now, of course, this was discussed on the 32 Thoughts podcast, come out just in the last day or so, as well as Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts column, talking about the fact that they have sources that tell them that they feel, even though there's only a guaranteed $1 million increase, that we could see a $2 million increase without really affecting escrow. Now, the thing from the NHLPA side, we've heard Marty Walsh, the new executive director, make comments that they are willing to talk to the NHL and negotiate around increasing the cap by more than $1 million, but one of the concessions would not be escrow. They're not budging on that. That is locked in at 6% for the next few years, and they do not want to change that, and I do not blame them. That's been something they've been working on and fighting to lower for quite a significant period of time. So ultimately, though, what's going to happen, how this is going to work out? Well, the sources are saying that they're basically looking at projected league revenues, and they're saying that based on those projections, they feel a $2 million increase would be able to be in place without affecting escrow. But technically, the agreement isn't totally the pandemic debt is paid back to the owners, that they were only going to see $1 million increase. So it wouldn't be enough to pay off the debt completely. So technically, like I said, they can't increase it by more than $1 million without negotiating. And Bettman's made it clear that he's willing to have those conversations, willing to negotiate, but what would the NHLPA have to do? You can't see the fact that Gary Bettman, of course, works for the owners. Marty Walsh works for the players. Certainly both sides want to have their leverages for making sure they get what they want for the people they represent. It's hard to imagine a scenario that Gary Bettman would just give Walsh, who's new to his role, an easy layup here, an easy W, and just be like, okay, yeah, we'll go to $2 million. Don't worry about, escrow or really giving in to anything else in return. We'll just go ahead and do that. That just doesn't seem to be how Bettman rolls. And like I said, to give him an easy win and right off the hop here, just doesn't seem the way things are going to go down. So it's hard to say how this is going to go, but theoretically, it should be able to be done without really any concessions being made. But will Bettman do that? It's highly doubtful. I think he's going to want something from the players in return. And if they don't want to budge on escrow, what could that be to make the league happy? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But certainly a scenario worth following as we approach the offseason here. On to the trade rumor section of the video. First up, I want to talk about Detroit. Detroit is a team who certainly showed a lot of promise early in the year, but ultimately by the deadline, we heard Steve Yzerman have his post-deadline media availability and basically say that the team wasn't quite ready for that next step. It felt like his team was still a step behind when it come to the rebuilding process compared to divisional rivals, the Ottawa Senators and the Buffalo Sabres. He felt both those teams' rebuilds were ahead of them and that they were maybe more ready for the next step than they were. He sold off some offensive type of players. Like we've seen Tyler Bertuzzi go to Detroit. We've seen him move on from Jacob Vrana. We don't know. I still think there's more of that story that we don't know. But Vrana is thriving hardcore in St. Louis. He's proven here down in the stretch that he still has what it takes to be successful in the NHL. But ever since he came back from the player assistance program, there was something there that just wasn't driving. I don't know if things weren't going well in the American Hockey League when he was doing his, I guess when they call it like his post-player assistance rehab type of thing, because usually after not playing for, 30 plus days, usually that's what happens when a player comes back from that program. They usually do a stint in the minors to get conditioning up. I know things weren't looking the greatest as far as production of things, but anyway, there has to be more to that we don't know. At the end of the day here, though, they traded off some offensive players, and they definitely need to replace some offense in their lineup, when it comes to the offseason. Now, they will have Marco Kasper coming over as well, which, could stand a chance to possibly get into the lineup next year. So that's an internal option that they might have. But, of course, he'd just be a rookie, still a young guy. I would suspect, like we saw Yzerman and the Red Wings do this past offseason, that they're probably going to try to mix in a few more veteran players who can help with the offense. It certainly makes a lot of sense that that's the route they'll go down. And they could look to a variety of ways. Now, Max Bultman, who's a beat writer for covers the Red Wings in Detroit, had a recent article where I was going through some scenarios, and he basically said that ultimately, adding some offensive forwards, especially someone at least one in the top six, is definitely going to be a top priority for Yzerman this offseason. Some names that kind of came up as potential targets could be a variety, and it depends on how Yzerman wants to go about this, but could a guy like G.T. Miller in Vancouver, who has been rumored to possibly be dealt by the Canucks before his no trade kicks in, is that something that could make sense? Maybe some of the players in Winnipeg. We know the Jets are likely going to be dismantling and likely moving some of their top forwards, including like a Mark Scheifele. Could a Scheifele make sense in Detroit under Steve Yzerman? Certainly wouldn't completely rule that out. Of course, Scheifele comes with a short-term contract remaining with a possibility for an extension, whereas Miller comes with a full extension and no trade clause already negotiated in. Now, at Vancouver, will they even trade Miller? It's difficult to say. I mean, based on information put out by Jim Rutherford and Patrick Albin here to their fans and stuff, I don't know that Miller's really going to be available. I know some think that they could still try to move him. We've heard from guys like Frank Saravalli saying that he still feels that it's a possibility and it's something that they would not be, minding to do to move on from that contract. But the Canucks have played a lot better down the stretch here. Obviously, they've gotten some changes made, new coaching, new systems in place, some different, players playing together. Made a lot of changes there since the last couple of months. And, maybe that's something that they may look at this and be like, well, Besser, Miller, do we trade them? But at the same time, you got to hope that they don't get a sense of false hope and false expectations, because once you get down the stretch, as much as the coaching change probably would help and has helped in this case, you have to think two players playing down the stretch with no real, pressure on them when their playoff, likelihood's already out of the question. It does take some of the pressure off. So you're going to wonder, are they going to get a sense of false hope? I don't know, but Miller is a, potential guy. I'm not convinced he's going to be moved, but I know there's some still out there that think it's possible. Scheifele or Wheeler or any of those guys, to me, out of Winnipeg, definitely makes sense, and I can see them maybe being a player their eyes are in my target. But if it's not them, it's going to be somebody comparable. Definitely look for the Red Wings to be looking to add help in the top six for sure. Of course, former Red Wing assistant GM Pat Verbeek, good friends with Steve Eisner running the Anaheim Ducks, is also going to be a busy guy this offseason. I know I'm looking at reports from Eric Stevens, the reports for Anaheim, looking at the possibility they're likely going to be looking to add on the blue line for sure. And especially some of the free agent defensemen that are out there on the market to possibly be targets, whether it be guys like, Matt Dumba, Damon Severson, Ryan Graves, any of those guys could be players that the Ducks target to add another, at least one more veteran defenseman into that mix is something that is very much likely going to be high on his priority list. Of course, he's trained a lot of players in the last two deadlines, and they haven't really replaced a whole lot. They have some of their own UFA players, and they need to decide if they're going to, offer extensions to or not, or how that's going to work. And Max Comtois, another young player who's rumored to be kind of, on the trade block for the better part of a year or more, still has not been dealt, and his name has come up yet again as a player that don't be surprised if Pat Verbeek tries to find for a fresh start. And if he can't trade him, I would be possible that he may not even be qualified. He could become an unrestricted free agent. His qualifying offer is going to be well over $2 billion. And Stevens felt like that might not be money that the Ducks really want to commit to him, considering how the RFA, contracts work, and the fact that you have to give them their qualifying offer and then they're committed to paying them at least that for 1 year. So hard to say, but Comtois is another name to watch. Could see some activity there. And in Philly, the Philadelphia Inquirer has a recent article out talking about how deep of a rebuild we're going to see, and basically how busy are the Flyers going to be. I know I found it interesting the other night watching the Senators play the Flyers, how head coach John Tortorella opted to not be on the bench and sit up in the box with Daniel Briere, and obviously watch the game from the eye in the sky perspective, and let longtime assistant coach Brad Shaw run the bench for the evening. Certainly I wonder if Tortorella maybe has a longer term desire to maybe be more on the management side. You have to wonder, but he certainly, regardless of what his plans are, you have to think that based on how things have gone in Philly, that he's definitely going to have a fairly big say on player personnel decisions. So you have to think, though, that almost lots of trades are likely. This article mentions several names. Of course, we have already heard lots about Kevin Hayes and the likelihood of him being traded, probably to a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets. This article also mentions that Travis Sanheim they feel is a good candidate based on how he's played and his contract and how Tortorella has spoken about him. They're not convinced that Tortorella sees Sanheim as really being a big part of the future of the team, so that's a possibility. Of course, Ivan Provorov has made headlines as well. Has been rumored to be possibly on the go for quite a long time too. Will Provorov have options, though, is the big question. Underwhelming numbers with his contract, and of course some of the off-ice stuff that some people have had issues with too. Of course, Travis Konechny could fetch a good return. I'm not entirely convinced Konechny gets dealt. They do need to keep some veterans around, and it seemed like he was a player Tortorella was a little bit more fond of. Of course, Cam Atkinson's another name to watch. Is he going to be able to come back and play? Will they look to a buyout? He'd have to be healthy to do so, but yet another option there too. So I think we're going to see extensive overhaul in the Flyers lineup as the offseason approaches. I think they're making a lot of big changes, and any and all of those guys may not be back next year. But I think the Philadelphia Inquirer certainly is right that a lot of these names are going to be in play. Whether or not they're all traded, of course, is another thing. It's hard to find deals. It takes two to tango. Got to find the right trade to help the organization. So it'll be interesting to see just how active and how deep this rebuild goes with the Flyers, which is going to be a whole new concept to this town in the city. This is not something we've really seen them do in the past. So let me know your thoughts and everything discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.